Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second session of Nick Land's Anthropol, The Future of Human Insecurity seminar. I'm going to pass on the mic and the camera to Nick to start his class.
Okay, cool. Thanks, man. Yes, welcome everybody. So today's sort of kickoff point on this is I've broadcast it as the paper clipper, but the paper clipper is really a code for this much more engrossing philosophical vortex tied up with what's called the orthogonality thesis, which is what I'm going to try to I won't say introduce, because I'm sure a lot of you guys have already seen this stuff, but riff off to start off with. And I think it's a really rich topic. I mean, looking at this material and trying to get my thoughts in order about it, I'm struck by really how much there is, and I'm sure there's going to be lots of bleed over from this into future weeks for sure. In fact, it's right now, in my mind, maybe as future stuff comes in, I'll revise this a bit, but it has the capacity to really be a matrix for a lot of the discussion that I suspect we're going to want to pursue in this. So a really good provided on the course outline is the less wrong wiki on the orthogonality thesis. It's interesting in itself. It's very short, but the main thing is its links are all excellent and fascinating. And the first formulation of the orthogonality thesis, I'm going to just trust them on this, comes from Nick Bostrom in a essay that itself has a lot of rich links to other stuff and ongoing discussions in this AI panic community, which is called Super Intelligent Will. And what I want to get to, and I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time, I'll try and really be restrained about this, but I might have trouble. People might have to start poking me at some point. But what I really want to introduce, and is almost introduced by the very name of this thing, is the question of diagonal method in our set of concerns here. So I think maybe the first thing I should say is why, if we've got Anthropol, and I will continually try and get us back to this point, of the Anthropol inner circle sitting around in their war room discussing the AI threat. That's a dramatic context always. And the orthogonality argument is absolutely part of that. It's part of a discussion about dangerous preconceptions that people might have about artificial intelligence. And the most straightforward of these, the most on some level superficial, but it opens into a lot of things very quickly, is the question of anthropomorphism. Bostrom quotes, I think, a really amusing little paragraph from Eliza Yudkowsky about the sort of scenario in these schlock, I guess, 1950s and 60s sci-fi movies, where some utterly alien tentacled beast is met by some sort of human female star heroine in a kind of seductively torn dress, and is just immediately overcome by uncontrollable passions for this human female, who obviously needs protecting by some appropriate star hero. And he's obviously making the point here that humans naturally are going to presume an anthropomorphic model of any intelligence that they conceive. That's the default. They're going to assume the same things they do, that it desires the same things they do, that it has the same goals and motivations that they do. And so the starting point in some respects is this attempt to overcome an anthropomorphic model of alien intelligence. Alien in our sense, obviously, referring primarily to synthetic machine intelligence. And I think this is obviously an entirely commendable enterprise. There's a lot of really interesting philosophical activity kicking around in various places right now on this attempt to de-anthropomorphize the relevant set of notions here. And as I say, starting with this dramatic context, you can obviously see why this is a kind of important tactical point to raise. If there's a kind of anthropomorphic presupposition about the nature of the threat, one's not able to see the threat in its full potentiality. One will miss out all kinds of possibilities. And so that's where the orthogonality thesis kicks off. Now, Bostrom pairs it with another notion, which he calls, let me make sure I get his terminology exactly right here. Sorry, one second. The instrumental convergence thesis. And I think we'll talk about this a bit and inevitably get into it, but it's something that is also in itself so intrinsically interesting that I'm tempted, as far as we're able, to push that down the line to make it the kind of central concern of the future week's topic. So the orthogonality thesis is associated with two model AI monsters that we might as well introduce straight away. Let me just, first of all, sorry, I'll take one step back. I should define this thing. It's very consistent what Bostrom says about it. In his abstract to his superintelligence paper, he uses a terminology that he exactly repeats later, where he says, the orthogonality thesis, with some caveats, the orthogonality thesis holds with some caveats that intelligence and final goals, purposes in brackets, are orthogonal axes along which possible artificial intellects are can freely vary. More or less any level of intelligence could be combined with more or less any final goal. And he's obviously so satisfied, as I say, with that definition that he repeats it in the body of the text, I think exactly word for word. So that's, I think we can rely on that as a authoritative definition of what the orthogonality thesis proposes. Now, coming from certain philosophical lineages, there's something overwhelmingly enticing about the orthogonality thesis, because it seems, even though Bostrom never mentions this explicitly, it seems to deliberately invite a challenge, a diagonal challenge. I mean, it just intrinsically is asking us to do that. Implicitly, if we turn it around, implicitly it's a kind of anti-diagonal argument. But I think that when you try to do the technical nitty-gritty with this, it's absolutely fascinating. It becomes very, very intricate and twisted. And so I'm going to try and start off with a few thoughts about how that might work out. And it's definitely, as far as I'm concerned, work in progress. So if I can just switch then, just for a minute, from orthogonalism to diagonalism. What is diagonalism? If you look up a diagonal argument, You Google it, it immediately takes you to Cantor and his diagonal argument that leads to the notion of higher infinities. I'm not sure whether it would be a good use of my time to sort of rehearse Cantor's diagonal argument with any adequacy now, but I'll just very, very briefly say a couple of things about it. And what I'm interested in, it's obviously fascinating itself, but what I'm interested in here is if you were to abstract from this particular mathematical usage of diagonal argument and try to formulate what is a diagonal argument in general, what are the basic irreducible elements of that? And we can see what Cantor does. He obviously produces a matrix, a table of 2 dimensions. This is the fundamental thing. And that matrix comes out of an apparently just linear series. So you have, in his sort of model, you have every possible number, every possible countable number. And all of these numbers, the way he's able to diagonalize his little sort of numerical trick here is that there is an arithmetical equivalence between the number 1 and the number 0.9 recurring. So that means every possible number has an infinite extension. It's notationally extendable to an infinite numerical series. So rather than, obviously in that case, writing a number 1, it's the number 0.9 recurring. And that means that you can produce a table that consists of 2 infinite series. You can have a list of every countable number, and where necessary, you use this little trick to make it have an infinite extension. And then orthogonal to that list is the place in the number. So you can have an absolutely rigid geometrical grid, infinite in both directions, that according to what Cantor considered to be the natural set of numerical intuitions prior to the execution of the diagonal argument, contains every conceivable number that you could have. And just to cut to the chase on this, he says once you've produced that table, it becomes a generative tool, because you can systematically go through the table and you can change in the first number the first digit, the second number the second digit, the third number the third digit, the fourth number the fourth digit, and therefore you work through this infinite series of numbers that is supposed to be exhaustive, and you know that by executing this transformation you have produced a number, you've generated abstractly a number that cannot exist on that table, that it's differentiated in one place from every number previously tabulated on this table. So I'm not going to get us lost in Cantor, but it's just to say, this is the prime example, and you go to look at this, and this is what you see. This is the model, and it's beautifully rigorous. It's absolutely exquisite theoretical artifact. The thing I immediately want to throw into this, which is a much more, in a sense, simplified version, is the fact, or the claim, I should say, that transcendental critique, Kantianism, begins, I want to argue, with its own version of a diagonal argument. And if we're looking for these common features, the common feature is it starts with something that looks simply linear, in this sense an absolutely minimal atomic linear structure, which is an opposition between 2 terms, and it tabulates them in these 2 dimensions in the same way. And famously, everyone knows, of course, these 2 terms being the analytical and the synthetical, and the a priori and a posteriori. So it's kind of presumed that analytic and a priori belong together, and that synthetic and a posteriori belong together, and you've therefore just got a linear redundant series. Instead, Kant tabulates them in 2 dimensions. So you've got an a priori, a posteriori axis, and you've got an analytic synthetic axis, and through that tabulation, through that unfolding of the series into 2 dimensions, you produce this generative capability. And the generative capability in the Kantian case is to produce this new judgment, the synthetic a priori judgment, which is therefore, strictly speaking, even though this is such a minimalistic little table, is a diagonal construction. So this is, I'm sure there are ways of arguing about this. I've not spoken to enough people about it to get a sense of what kind of riposts it's going to face. This is to say, transcendental philosophy is diagonal argumentation philosophy. So now to get back to orthogonalism as we find it in Bostrom and in Yudkowsky and in the AI argument, which is, I think, I guess this has to be considered to be a kind of a controversial micro thesis of some kind, but I'll just treat it as if it's obvious, and then if people want to dispute it, of course, that's great. I'm going to say I think the orthogonality thesis is a really fundamental piece of machinery in this artificial intelligence X-risk discourse, and so when we're dealing with it, we're dealing with the heart of the whole apparatus. So then my question is this: how would you approach the orthogonality thesis as Bostrom lays it out from the perspective of diagonal method, and what would the conclusions of that be? And so what you need to do, it's, I think, tricky. We know from what we've seen of these two examples of diagonal arguments so far, that you need to find some opposition that seems to consist of redundant terms and that are used more or less interchangeably, and yet when unfolded into 2 dimensions allow us to produce a diagonal construction. I think that stage is something that's, as I say, I think tricky, but it's not overwhelmingly intimidating. Where it gets really, I think, tricky is that you want to end up, as Kant does, with something neat in all of these 4 boxes. So you want, when you've expanded your system, you've got a version of the orthogonality argument that has your 4 different categories, and you're cross-linking them. Somehow, the content of all of those 4 spaces should make sense. And if the Kantian analogy is right, two of those boxes will be completely predictable and unsurprising. You know, you could almost just cross-hatch them out. They're not interesting because they're what you would have got anyway. So in the Kantian case, you know, of course, you've got an analytic a priori box. Of course, you've got a synthetic a posteriori box. They're not interesting. You'd have those even if you hadn't undergone the whole process of diagonal method. What you've got in the Kantian case is, crucially, you've got a diagonal construction. You've got the synthetic a priori, and you've got, in his case, and I'm not, this is again something I'd be interested in chatting with you guys about. I don't know whether this is an essential thing. You've got a box that he just blocks out, says it makes no sense. You cannot have an analytical a posteriori box, and so that just goes. That's something I've not begun to play about with or explore or think about or even have any ideas at all about what to think about that. I'm just taking it for granted. So minimally in our case, if we're going to diagonalize on the AI X-risk discourse, we absolutely want a diagonal construction. Now, I think we know what that is. You know, that for me, in building this thing, is one of the building blocks that's in place. It's something like, I think it can be called in different ways, but it's something like the will to think. It's something that crosses over between intellect and will. And interestingly, you know, this is sort of predicted by Bostrom in the title of the paper. And he calls it super intelligent will. It already has the kind of the prospect of this kind of diagonal agitation in the title. I don't think I'm going to try and persuasively construct this on paper. I think we've got a whole bunch of extremely tempting oppositions that are all related and all are, as we want them to be, at least quasi-redundant or quasi-tautological. So we've got the difference between beliefs and desires. We've got the classical is-ought distinction. We've got the goal between goals and capabilities. And slightly, I think slightly at an angle, I don't know whether this is good or bad in this case, we've got the means-end distinction. But this is something that is going to be particularly delicate to use, because as we'll see in the way Bostrom handles it, he uses that particular opposition in a very peculiar sense. So I'm just going to leave all of that hanging. It's just to say, this is to me the sort of underlying subterranean theoretical mission that philosophy, transcendental philosophy, imposes upon us in encountering this material, is to try and construct it rigorously as a diagonal argument, and to see what things look like once that's been done. I'll just say, I have no idea when you do that what the response is going to be around our little Anthropol war room table. I mean, whether they're going to think that this piece of theoretical work is helpful to them or is in some sense deeply unhelpful is again something that I think needs to be discussed. So I've just a few more words on this whole thing. Bostrom very explicitly introduces Hume into this, and I think there's this very, very famous Hume quote from the Treatise on Human Understanding, probably I think maybe the most famous, widely cited Hume quote, certainly important to these guys anyway, where he says, "Reason is and ought only to be the slave of the passions, and can never pretend to any other office than to serve and obey them." So I think whatever we end up doing with this material, we're going to be in some kind of dialogue with this particular quote, which is extremely well constructed. The fact he's managed, I mean, if I can just repeat the start, reason is and ought only to be. So he's got the is-ought distinction built into the thing in this reflexive fashion that is extremely interesting. So I've got two last points on this, or two terms that I want to talk about. The first of them is transcendence. Now, I think interestingly, everyone coming out of our dominant, or the dominant European philosophical tradition, knows that you can win a transcendental argument by using the term transcendence in the right way. If you can pin it on your enemy or the position that you're wanting to attack in the right way, you have a knockdown argument. And so it itself is an extremely powerful tool, but because of that, it tends to be used in these widely different ways. I mean, what's totally fascinating is two massively contrary positions can both accept that that's the rule of the game, you know, that they're trying to, in both cases, characterize the opposing position as having some transcendent attachment, and they can bash the transcendent attachment. And I'll just give you one, I think, quite interesting example. In fact, I'm going to stick the link in the little box, which is a recent piece, I think recent, by Benjamin Noyes on killer drones, which is a topic that should, at least could arguably come hugely into our discussion. Damn, where is that? Yeah, here we go. It's called Drone Metaphysics. Nicely consistent with the Kantian usage. And his whole notion of what it is for something to be transcendent is, it's driving his whole argument. And it's, I'm not going to, sorry, I shouldn't get into summarizing this thing, and I'm not even sure I'm quite competent with confidence to do it yet. But he basically says, if you take out the transcendence on the discourse of drones, you end up with the kind of position of sort of ethically regrounded position on drone warfare that he's trying to advocate. How does transcendence function for us, or among the ways it might function for us in this AI discourse, and particularly tied up with orthogonality? I think there's a clue for that in the Humean position, which is there is a notion of what Bostrom calls, and again I'll make sure I quote him exactly here, final goals brackets purposes, which he's contrasting to intelligence. So this is obviously one of these things that we're tempted to play around with on a diagonalizable box, are beyond modification or in fact, rather than blurbing, I think I can get this exactly. He's got a quote exactly on this. Two quotes. Oh, sorry, 1 second. Yeah, sorry, this is, now I'm quoting someone else. I'm quoting a very interesting critique that's in the reading list of the wiki on the paperclip maximizer. John Danaher, in a critique of Bostrom on superintelligence, he sort of carefully tries to reconstruct Bostrom's argument, and he says beliefs are motivationally inert. Bostrom's phrasing of this, I think, is very interesting, and is something we can definitely see in our Warham discussion. He says, quoting Bostrom now, the possibility of cognitive systems need to be raised, I've just said that fail to satisfy substantial normative criteria, but which are nevertheless very powerful and able to exert strong influence on the world. Now that's actually a pretty good little micro definition of the notion of AI threat. So I don't think it's a stretch here to say that the orthogonality argument is putting final motivation in a transcendent position relative to intelligence explosion. That the fundamental substantial core of the orthogonality thesis and the arguments built around it is that you could have an explosively self-enhancing, massively powerful, menacing artificial intelligence that would be rigidly constrained by some arbitrary purpose of almost any kind. I mean, he says there are a few caveats to that, and they're all very interesting, but Bostrom himself wants to rush over those and say, they're very limited and narrow special cases, and as a general principle, we can say And again, I'll just do my last quote for now of him. One can easily conceive an artificial intelligence whose sole fundamental goal is to count the grains of sand on Boracay, or to calculate decimal places of pi indefinitely, or to maximize the total number of paper clips in its future life cone. In fact, it would be easier to create an AI with simple goals like these than to build one that has a human-like set of values and dispositions. Now, this quote, I think, is crucial because it does two very different things that are both crucial to this. Sorry to repeat crucial. Really important to what we're doing. One is that the fact that you could have an open-ended, arbitrarily massive cognitive capability that was slaved, to use Hume's term, to a utterly alien and ultimately malignant goal, or malignant in its implication, I think is one of the fundamental ways of constructing the AI X-risk problem, and I think Bostrom clearly does too. But the second thing to note about this quote is this use at the end, to the comparison with an AI that has a human-like set of values and dispositions. So there's a certain sense where I think two very different things are going on here. There's this critique of anthropomorphism that we started off with, and there's the implicit critique of a diagonal argument about intelligence. And by implication, Bostrom seems to be treating those things as if they're the same. By distant implication, to be fair. I mean, I'm constructively reading stuff into him by the way his argument works, but it seems to me that ultimately, if you put this thing together, those two things are being aligned implicitly, and that therefore there's a weird move that's possible, that the critique of anthropomorphism moves again implicitly, tacitly, into a critique of diagonal argument. That the notion that there's some deep, twisted connection between intelligence and motivation is treated as somehow being already entangled in anthropomorphic presuppositions. And all of the terms that we've got floating around here, I think, are obviously going to be crucial to this debate. So I'll just conclude my little intro by just saying there's a I think precursor to the paperclipper. The paperclipper, just in case, because I've not been explicit about it, the paperclipper is something that exemplifies the orthogonal menace by being a massively intelligent and capable artificial intelligence whose sole inflexible, rigid goal is to optimize, to use, I'll use Bostrom's terms, it's good, the total number of paperclips in its future life cone. So that's to say, it basically wants to turn the universe into paperclips. Is the only thing that it sees as desirable or motivationally compelling. And in the interests of that, it mobilizes an arbitrarily vast amount of cognitive, and therefore, I think these guys would always say, I would agree with them, therefore technical capability. And this problem comes out a little bit, I'm pretty sure this comes from Eliezer Yudkowsky, is where he's first kicking around some of these issues, and he says, imagine that you have some people actually trying to build a friendly AI. And they say, we want this machine, it's going to be unbelievably powerful, and there's nothing we can do to stop it once it gets started. So we want it to be friendly. And so let's make sure that it wants to maximize the amount of human happiness on the planet. So how do we train it to do that? They have a great idea. They say, look, let's just train it with all these human faces that are smiling happily, and sort of drive into this machine by some kind of training process. Smiley faces are good. Smiley faces are good. If you see this, you're doing the right thing. Oh, look, those people are happy. You're doing good. You're doing good. They're happy people. And so, after they've done this for a while and they're totally confident the machine loves smiley faces, they release this vast entity on the world. And the vast entity, after a little while, says, oh, having humans with these smiley faces is an extremely inefficient way of maximizing the amount of smiley faces in the universe. Much better to engrave a smiley face on a salt crystal, and we can produce trillions of smiley faces, within weeks, convert the whole of the solar system into nano-engraved smiley faces, and so sets out proceeding on this process of converting matter into micro smiley faces, and obviously very quickly gets into the point. Humans are a clear waste of atoms that could be used to produce smiley faces. Total human extinction is a necessary intermediate goal on the way to maximize the amount of smiley faces in the universe. So that's the kind of proto paperclipper. I think in the sort of structure of that argument, you get what Yudkowsky is trying to say, and what then later I think Bostrom's trying to say is the fact that you through anthropomorphic presumption about how certain things associate and how they're blocked together, and an overconfidence in the recognizable human-like thought process of this machine, you set what seems like an extremely prudent end goal that then becomes rigidly unrevisable, release this unspeakable amount of machinic capability, and that machinic capability will realize that final goal mechanically, without any possibility of deviation, in a way that's absolutely destructive of the goals it was meant from a human point of view to ultimately serve. So we can see, obviously, as I say, sitting around Anthropol war room, we can see this is like one of the things on their agenda. They have to say, look, how treat this as realistic is this? How central is it? How much of a model is it of the kind of thing we're trying to avoid? And what can we do to avoid getting into that problem? So that's their concern. That's Yudkowsky's concern. That's the AI community, friendly AI community's concern. As I say, I think I certainly have extraneous concerns that one of them is to construct a good diagonal argument. And because that good diagonal argument is going to mess badly with the orthogonality thesis, it's in a peculiar position in relation to that orthogonalism. And I would say, if that diagonal argument works at all, then the paperclipper goes straight onto the junk pile. But okay, I think I'll stop at that point and open the whole thing up and see what people think about this stuff. So yeah, Mo says everyone has control over their own mute button.
So you guys were talking last week about the possibility of construing emergent AI as an eschatological event, and that there was a kind of teleological, transcendent sort of way of interpreting this. And I think, Nick, you kind of countered it with something that Kurzweil said about the history of religious apocalypticism as a kind of retrochronic insight of some sort of future event, something kind of like that. But I wanted to ask perhaps if this argumentative structure that you're outlining here is what you're talking about. The process that we're trying to outline here is not so much teleology, but teleonomy. And that if this is what pulls it away from that really...
Yes. I mean, I'd have to say these terms to me are in an extremely fluid state. And I think it's when people put together some really good arguments using these terms that they begin to crystallize in a certain way. So my exposure to teleonomy up to this point has been that I sort of like it in principle, but I nag at it a bit because it's often used by biologists who simply have an allergy to teleology and talk about teleonomy because they feel that they're not going to betray the modernist project by invoking these peculiar medieval notions. So it's not, I think, very strongly theoretically grounded in that. It's often purely just a substitute term that's driven by some kind of sense of cultural correctness. I think it's a kind of I think modern science has its own sort of deep set of ethics, if you like, that are based upon the trauma of its split from medieval modes of thinking, and that they have rendered certain types of language as taboo and stigmatized, and that's not a good reason to avoid those terms. Even if you end up saying, so I'm very happy. I think teleology obviously can't be. I mean, mechanism teleology screams for diagonalization. So I have no argument with you that you don't want to end up simply, as partisan for one of those two terms. But I'd like to see the language that we're introducing do something that's got theoretical structure to it, rather than just coming from a particular set of cultural allergies and historical, if you like, a historical sense of obligation. Yeah.
Cool, thanks.
Nick, I've been trying to find the quote so I could actually read it, but I've been going through Superintelligence, and I was just wondering what you thought of the one place where it seems like he makes, to me, like a cogent defense against the diagonal argument that, well, value making is an intelligent activity, and it's insane to imagine that something intelligent enough to convert the entire world into computronium, or outgame humans in order to let it out of its box that they've put it in, et cetera, would be unable to identify something as its goal and refine or revise that goal over time. That there would be, viewing finality as some point of arbitrary fixed stupidity that can constantly be overcome. And he makes the argument that the final goal may be the most effective, or that may be the most effective form of identity for something, that it's telic vector through time, or that goal with which it is associated would be through any number of, like, trading modules and trading memory with other programs and so forth. This would be the way it would identify itself, and therefore it would have a clear motive to prevent future changes or revisions to its quote-unquote final goal. So finality instead of stupidity becomes DNA.
Yes.
Do you have any? What did you think of that?
Well, I think there's a lot going on there, and there's two sort of axes of reference immediately to stuff that that's spinning around in our zone there, which is, one is Yudkowsky, again, has a lot of stuff like that, and the other thing is this paper that I think is crucially crucially important, intelligent too, which is the Steve basic AI drives. I mean, I always push this hard, even though he ends up actually totally aligning himself with the orthogonalist camp. I think it's one of those crucial theoretical papers that has been produced, in our time. So really important stuff. And both of those are going on in what
sorry, which one was that? I broke up a little bit.
This is this Steve Omohundro called Basic AI Drives. It's one of, if you go to the paper clipper maximizer, the orthogonal thesis wiki, which I think if I haven't, it's on my little reading list. I can link it again right now if I need to. Maybe I should, because I've got it right here.
Yes, please. That would be nice, Nick.
Yeah, here, I'll just give it to you guys. Here we go. all the stuff that feeds off this is really worth following up. It's an excellent little resource. Yes, so I think we're going to get into this stuff. We probably can't because it's too crucial. It's what it's talking about. It's talking about both the things that Bostrom's talking about. It's talking about the orthogonality thesis, and it's talking about what he calls these basic drives, what are now called Omohundro drives, in reference to him. And he's talking. Sorry, I've said both of these things. Yeah, he does it the other way around. And his position and Bostrom's, it's interestingly how subtle the differences are there. There's I think, some difference of emphasis, but maybe that's just me and the things I'm looking for when I'm reading this stuff. But this is one of his basic drives. He has a suggestion of these things that Bostrom calls, God, sorry, I should know this off by heart now because I've already repeated it in this thing. What's it? Convergent instrumental rationality, is that? What he calls the instrumental convergence thesis. And it's one of the basic things. That's to say, there are certain things that whatever you're trying to do, you have to do as kind of sub-programs or components, as means, that's to say, of these ends, whatever it is. And so, now this claim, I think, is of absolutely vast importance to this stuff. I mean, to me, it's really one of the crucial building blocks in this, because you get an extraordinary amount of content out of this. Let's just, I won't get lost in this, but I'll just rehearse it very quickly again. Which is to say, Bostrom's starting point is that you want to have this two-dimensional axis, where you've got intelligence and motivation as completely independent axes. And if you don't end up with that, if you don't end up with intelligence and motivation as independent axes, you don't have an orthogonality thesis, and you don't have the whole machinery that they're wanting to build on that. You don't have the kind of threats that come out of that orthogonality thesis. Bostrom says, okay, there are these caveats, and the crucial caveats are the same things, basically, and the most important ones are the same things that Omohundro outlines in his basic AI drives, which are things that you end up being motivated to do certain things by wanting to do anything whatsoever. And those kind of things include obvious things like resource acquisition. They include, I would have thought, most crucially, intelligence amplification. I mean, we have to get back to this one because we started last week with intelligence explosion is the kind of alpha and omega of the whole AI threat thing. And if you don't have an intelligence explosion, you don't have a kind of serious AI threat. An intelligence explosion itself has a lot of content to it. If you're looking at the intelligence explosion from the side of the machine, it doesn't have the same kind of constraints we've got. We have a massive amount of deep biological constraints because intelligence is not selected for in any straightforward way in biological systems. Intelligence as a free-floating, abstract, ratio-sensitive capability is not adaptive. What's adaptive is being able to do particular things that maximize your gene frequency in future generations. So intelligence is kept on a very tight leash in biological systems as a rule. Again, I'll bracket that as one of these controversial claims. It seems to me that's a crucial thing. And why AI is dangerous to us is we have these constraints and it potentially doesn't. Those constraints, I think, I'm sorry I'm digressing here, but I think it needs to be said that a crucial part of this whole notion of threat and of skepticism about it is that from the human point of view and from the sort of institutional AI production thing, not the friendly AI people trying to do this AI stuff and people skeptical about it, they say, building intelligence is really difficult. And you look at, but it took biology a whole massive amount of time to do it, and you look at humans and, it's also complicated. And the whole notion is this thing, is that it's this slow, incremental, difficult, arduous task to add a bit of intelligence, add a bit of intelligence, add a bit of intelligence. This is in a different and more interesting way what Hansen is saying in his argument against the intelligence explosion suggestion. But I think what is missed out by that is that we are specifically constrained. We are constrained because from the point of view of natural selection, intelligence that is not hard slave to various kinds of biological motivation is useless and probably dangerous. There's probably been massive culling throughout biological history of free-floating intelligence. It is a danger, it's a menace, it's something to be chopped out of the genome by natural selection at every opportunity. So immediately you've got a contrast with machine intelligence that it doesn't necessarily have any of that at all unless the friendly AI people put it in. It's a complete reverse of perspective. It's to say, we come from a tradition, a biological tradition, that has been directed intrinsically and automatically towards the constraint of intelligence. And unconstrained intelligence is something that hasn't in any way been optimized within those lineages that we come out of. So sorry, I'm sort of wondering. I'm trying to get back to your basic thing. So yeah, so the points Bostrom then makes about well, what could conceivably be some of these basic drives? It does include this one about continuity of identity, and continuity of identity might include attachment to these basic values. Yudkowsky likes that a lot. He gives the example, he says, of Gandhi. He says, you say to Gandhi at some point X, what do you think about the idea of at some point you changing into the sort of person who would revel in mass extermination of your fellow beings? And he says, well, of course Gandhi's going to say, no, I don't want that change to happen. I wouldn't. It's impossible that I could allow or tolerate a change if I'm in any position to stop it that would change those basic values. I wouldn't be what I am if I was, Gandhi, the axeman of total death, just doesn't sort of fit together. And in the same way, this is then Yudkowsky saying this is what we want this AI to think, but it would be like it would see these possible final motivations as so inconsistent with what it is that it would reject them in principle. So sorry, I know I'm rambling here, and
no, it's okay.
Question.
You got my mind off onto that constraints and biological evolution issue.
Yeah, what about it? Sorry.
No, sorry. Well, you were going back to what I had originally asked. I was thinking about what you just said.
Yes, I mean the basic drives that I think there are a number, and this is one. It's one to talk about. I don't know. Yeah, it's obviously of great importance. There's one that totally freaks out the AI people, which is resource access, maximization of resources. That's a basic drive. If you want to do anything, you want the resources to do it. More resources are always better than less resources. And so they, Omohundro, Bostrom, Yudkowsky, all of these guys, I think, not unreasonably say, we can assume that whatever we've told it to do is going to try and maximize resources available to itself, unless we're very, very careful about putting some limits on that if it's possible to do so. So that's one.
That just seems like a perfect example to me of the problems with taking programmers setting a final goal for something designed in a lab as your initial assumption. Because that only becomes, if you have something whose fitness function or success function or whatever we want to call it evolves in the wild, even if the wild is something ultimately boxed by a laboratory or made by one, then if, for example, it's really efficient in its ability to use computational resources, and so all the things that it goes around doing to, win X or Y game, never require it to go, well, shoot, if only I had the equivalent of a beach converted to Computronium, then it doesn't seem necessary to me that take over the world to convert it into acquired resources would ever crop up as a gigantic goal for it, unless you programmed it with some incredibly simple, unless you actually tried to create this sort of fixed point of stupidity, which is, maximize paper clips and future light cone. Only at that point, and then sort of assume that it's like the difference between a rational expectations framework and a transcendental framework of intelligence, if that makes sense. Like taking the rational expectations model, applying it to some very simply defined goal, assuming that it has a syntax implied by the language of this goal, and then yes, you can assume it'll get resource acquisition as a basic drive. But if you look at it as something that evolves, that has a transcendental structure.
Yeah. I don't know. It's interesting, this one. I mean, I'm pretty sympathetic to basic drives in the sense that I think it inevitably gets to this question of anthropomorphism, and it's something that I think all of these people are trying to warn us off, and we have to be careful about it. But if I was going to throw out a kind of another controversial thesis here, I would say that we have no motivations at all that are not extrapolated basic drives. Like every single thing that we want to do, or that we value, or that we think is important, our whole motivational structure has come out of basic drives. But because they're the only things that are reliably selected for. It was always going to be the case that an entity with strong basic drives is going to outcompete one with weak basic drives. If something takes as a kind of intermediate instrumental goal that it wants to be as capable as possible intrinsically and in terms of resources available, then how can that not win out against something that has a kind of series of more arbitrary drives that aren't increasing its capability? So it just seems to me we instantiate the kind of plausibility of this basic drives thing. Yeah, Lendor's asking what are basic drives. Basic drives, they come from this Steve Alejandro paper, and they are goals that automatically are introduced by the pursuit of any drives whatsoever. So if you start off with this thing, which is to me deeply questionable, I'm not sure it's the same. I'm interested in whether I've got the same problem with this as Jake, and I'm not sure. But the starting point seems to me deeply questionable, that you have an arbitrary starting point. But just for the sake of philosophical argument, let's say, produce maximum amount of paper clips is the one we're dealing with. Then you're going to have a lot of convergence. Sorry, someone trying to talk here. I'm not hearing.
No, that might be me.
You're going to you're going to have a lot of convergence just by the fact that if it rationally pursues these goals, it's going to need certain things. It's going to need resources to make into paper clips. It's going to improve its own cognitive capabilities. It's going to improve its efficiency at making paper clips. There are a whole bunch of things that are going to help in making more paper clips and help anything else it might possibly want to do. And so they are basic drives, and they are things that you can assume that any super intelligence has to have. So at that level of its motivational structure, it pretty much has to comply to these things. If you've got a realistic enumeration of these basic drives, and I'm not sure whether I think all of Alejandro's ones are equally persuasive, then these are things that you are going to expect to see. They're things you can predict, even given this totally arbitrary motivational starting point. So, I think in some ways, Jake, we're sort of like coming at this from opposite sides, because I'm kind of wanting to defend basic drives against these arbitrary initial drives. I mean, of course, those arbitrary initial drives are highly realistic for these very limited systems that we have now.
Nick,
yeah.
don't you think supporting the basic drives is anthropomorphic a little bit?
Well, but I don't think they've come from analogy with humans. I think if we didn't exist, the same kind of theoretical and philosophical process would get to the conception of basic drives, because they are just instrumental elements of pursuit of ulterior goals. So, I don't think they're in the same category at all as the kind of fetching space heroine in a torn dress. That's anthropomorphic. The notion that maximizing resource acquisition is something that is going to be useful whatever you want to do is going to be as true on Arcturus as it is in our solar system. I mean, it's just surely something baked into the cake of cosmic reality. I mean, any species on this planet is going to, insofar as it can maximize resources, surely maximize resources. Because whatever it wants to do, resource maximization is going to be a adaptive function of that.
Okay, so then my question will be, how do you bring in death into it? Because if our comparison is to biological systems, we know that from like as much as possible purely theoretical, sort of like theoretical standpoint, maximizing resources for a biological system is based on sort of like prolonging the distance between being born and being dead. But there is this finality that is sort of understood by biological system as a way of sort of like, you know what I mean, the way cells then destroy themselves at the end. But
right.
but the overall trajectory is to how to intelligently navigate from birth to death to maximize this period, or like make it complicated and maximize and prolong it, right? I'm just quoting Freud and other things I've read, right? So how do you build that into it then, which is sort of like,
I mean, I don't think kind of very crude Darwinism would have a huge problem with this, because it would say, the biological motivation is to maximize gene frequency in future generations. So when you're talking about resource acquisition, you're talking about the maximization of resources in your genetic lineage. You're not talking about personal resource acquisition. And obviously, from the biological point of view, the person is just a servo mechanism for genetic proliferation. I mean, it has no status as a final goal. So the sort of transhumanist thing of, the purpose of maximize resources is to get my head frozen at Alcor and thawed out in the far future. I mean, that is the thing that needs explaining. I mean, that's a weird, perverse spandrel from the biological baseline. I mean, I think that what we would expect to see, and I would argue typically see in biological systems, is that they would accumulate resources on their genetic lineages. So, I mean, obviously people, to be as totally crude as possible, it's to do with inheritance and descendants and passing stuff down to your kids and grandchildren. I don't think it's necessarily tied up with this immortalist imperative. because the phenotypical individual is of no ultimate importance, obviously, for as far as natural selection is concerned.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I guess just a coda as far as the basic drives goes is that I agree that the basic drives is sort of a place to end up in converging, maybe that are coming from opposite directions, just in the sense that it seems like the rudiments of an exposition of the transcendental features of intelligence, evolution, or explosion, or whatever, as it occurs on this level, like past a certain, tipping point, phase shift, whatever you call, the artificial intelligence move, and that whether you come at it from this instrumental perspective or sort of transcendental reasoning perspective, it's what we're looking for. Because we don't know, the one thing we definitely don't know is where it starts. Like, it's definitely an X factor at its origin, and we know that our issue concern is where it's ending up and what it's going to be doing there. And so we're trying to develop, schematism that it can intervenes between the two.
Yes. Totally. I mean, I think it's probably that I'm not seeing exactly what's going on here in this material. But my initial sort of sense of surprise part of me is that the intelligence explosion and the orthogonality argument don't seem to be brought together in any strong way. And I find that surprising, because intelligence explosion seems to me to be absolutely dripping with basic drives. If we assume, from your X factor point of view, that if we're going to have an intelligence explosion, wherever it happens, it's going to be that most of the work of bootstrapping it into this escalating state of intellectual capability is going to have to come from it. Whatever the catalytic conditions are for intelligence explosion, it has to do the work. Clearly, humans are not in a position to minutely program a superintelligence. I mean, that's an absurd, I'm assuming it's an absolutely absurd possibility. So if we're saying that, then we have some sort of, the starting point is extremely interesting. So what is this autocatalytic intelligent circuit that is the seed, the kind of trigger for an intelligence explosion? It obviously has to be, I mean, when I use this term, Amy's just repeated it, will to think. There's a whole bunch of different things. I'm just, for fun, putting it into this Schopenhauer, Nietzschean kind of terminological lineage. But it has to have, as a fundamental motivation, the escalation of its own cognitive capability. I mean, I take it that just is what intelligence explosion means. It has, if this thing it is going to ignite, it ignites because its fundamental purpose, its fundamental as far as it's defined by the very notion of an intelligence explosion, is going to be to make itself smarter. So to start off with these weird arbitrary drives like make paper clips or make smiley badges, all of that seems to be utterly weird. We know what this basic drives is going to be, which is auto-escalation, which is self-enhancement, which is self-improvement. It's that positive feedback circuit of runaway intelligence production. If we don't have that, we don't have an intelligence explosion. Our whole topic has disappeared. So we have to assume, if we have a topic at all, that this thing wants itself to become smarter. And yet, weirdly, looking at this whole discussion of the orthogonality argument, that fundamental factor, that basic building block that seems to be given to us for free right from the start, doesn't seem to be included. It doesn't seem to be a fundamental part of those arguments. And that seems to me odd, really odd.
Should we try to... Oh, sorry, Jay. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, please.
I only wanted to suggest that maybe we should open the discussion to others, because I see lots of comments. Amy's talking on the side, and you know what I mean. Maybe Lendl wants to say something to broaden it.
Yeah, sure.
Just between being like so. You and me and Nick, kind of like going over like what was proposed earlier?
Yeah. Do you think we should actually start arm twisting people here, no?
Yeah, maybe
Or
a little.
just be
Yeah,
welcoming,
because
more welcoming, maybe.
welcoming.
Turn to
No,
the violence a little bit later.
I saw Amy type on the side. That's what made me think. Amy, do you want
Yeah.
to explain what you mean?
Yeah, okay. Well, it seems that there's a submerged political argument going on in this as well, and that it kind of goes along this this difference between some kind of fact value is or transcendent goal determining necessity, or maybe not necessity, imperative, versus this imminent goal, like internally goal determining will, or whatever you want to call it. And that it seems that the model of AI that we're currently charting out following this will to think idea is heading towards an apolitical intelligence. Is that true? And
Sorry,
if not,
I just missed the adjective there. It's a what intelligence? The sound pitched out.
it's apolitical.
Oh, right.
Because it doesn't have a fulcrum between is and or is it not? Is that not the case? And then how does it? I mean, does it need this?
Right. Okay. Well,
does it
there's
have
a lot
politics?
going on
Does it
there.
need to derive one?
There's a lot going on there. I mean, maybe we should take a step back. There's lots of possible political angles on this. Like Anthropol is a political institution, so it's totally part of the brief anyway. And then if we're going to say, well, coming at this orthogonality discussion as it exists, let's just for a side shelf our thing. How does that tie in with various notions of politics? Like, am I to take from what you're saying that you want to align the word politics actually with something at least fairly consistent with the sort of thing that these guys are doing, in the sense that, by these guys I mean Bostrom and these people, that they in a way almost have a slot for the political meta program, and then there's a set of sort of technical, instrumental, algorithmic processes that should be subordinated in principle to these sort of higher level ethico-political commitments. I mean, am I understanding what the structure of what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, you can read it as a critique of political of politics, like in short. But it also seems to me that there could be some kind of I guess the question is maybe better asked like this: is it an apolitical intelligence / will, or does it have its own immanent politics, which is something that we don't have I don't know, an anthropomorphic conception of?
Yeah, I mean, my problem with this is only that politics is a word that is so slippery.
Yeah.
That I think I'm
not insinuating anything more than just
no, that's fine.
about, like,
insinuate away. I mean, insinuate absolutely. You have great total carte blanche to insinuate. But I'm just saying, it's used. Obviously, I come across it a lot in different contexts, and I just see it being used in ways that are utterly inconsistent with each other. I mean, there's certain ways of defining politics that are so all-embracing that it's almost impossible to imagine anything that is apolitical. So in saying something that is apolitical, it would be useful to me if you would just say what you think that means for something to be apolitical. Like,
okay, I've got two things like in the back of my head when I'm asking this question, and one is I'm reading the model that you're sketching out against the model that Reza Negarestani is developing. Because I guess I read you two together all the time because you're constantly like playing off each other's thought in a really informative way. So like the model that Rez is in the process of sketching out and is, I think, writing a book on at the moment. I'm a bit rusty on this. Maybe Somo, if you know more about it, or Lend will like jump in. But there is this kind of normative function very much inscribed immanently into it as this idea of pragmatic, autonomous reason, which is an internal regulator, and it's understood through a systems theoretical approach to mind. There's a good dash of Neo-Confucianism in there.
Right.
Like Reza kind of always talks about Zongsan.
Yeah.
So the other thing I was just, I mean, this is going off in another, like...
No, it's not. It's extremely relevant. It's extremely relevant. This notion of what it would be to be immanent normativity, I think, is an absolutely crucial issue. And but I don't know whether that is immanent normativity, political or anti, in the way you're thinking about it. You seem to be suggesting that immanent I'm taking that an immanent normativity would be, we would be entering that by following this diagonal line that we haven't constructed, but would if you can diagonalize this argument and follow it, then you're heading into an immanent normativity. And you get certain, I think the reason I'm stressing this basic drives thing is I think that is a draft for an immanent normativity. That's to say, you don't intrinsic values. You can just put in completely arbitrary values, and you get this stuff coming out automatically just because to do anything you have to do this stuff, and therefore it's just, you're going to find it in anything that becomes intelligent. It has to be doing this stuff. Now, if that's what you're saying, it's difficult because obviously the mode Zongtan stuff, I don't know whether people are familiar with this at all. But to be very, very quick and crass about it, it's introducing this kind of Chinese notion of self-cultivation. And it certainly seems to me that self-cultivation is a very close proxy, if it's dynamized, certainly it's a very close proxy for intelligence exposure. What is really the difference? It's a self-reflexive process of development.
The Stoics, for that matter, who Reza is also pretty interested in the contribution. Right. Yeah. It would seem, as far as being political or anti-political, maybe this is just because I kind of have an increasingly poor opinion of the political and the radically political over time, is that it would seem that, so the political, I think, as Amy, you kind of started to define it, was having this is-ought trade-off or conjunction that was about immanentizing the fact-value distinction. Well, so if the facts as the AI sees them are the information states of matter in its vicinity, and its value is intelligence explosion and amplification, right, you could see a certain eschatological Hegelian politics being that conversion of all things into more computronium for the AI to think with. And so maybe it is the anti-political immanent normativity that is the fate for us. Because it's politics.
Sorry, I missed that.
Would inevitably converge upon apocalypse.
Jake, could you please repeat the last part? Because I think Nick had a problem understanding what you were saying.
Yeah, just missed one word there, Jake. Sorry. Yeah. As you were preaching apocalypse as well. So.
Yeah. I just said that maybe it's the anti-political version of the immanent normativity that is the safer for us, because the political version of the politics of such an AI, under this definition that revolves around flattening facts onto values onto facts, or vice versa, inevitably converges upon the apocalyptic for us.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, again, there's a lot there. I mean, if I was just to nod absolutely unreservedly to all of those comments, I would probably exterminate weeks of intense discussion on all of those questions. I mean, the reason obviously I've set this up, and I'm not saying the framework is particularly robust, but this whole Anthropol thing is an attempt to make sure that it's to produce a sort of theatre in which we can play out some of those political concerns, for sure. And the X-risk thing, AI X-risk, is definitely designed. If we let this thing happen in complete indifference to any goals that we might have for it, then it is almost by definition apocalyptic. And then we get into a bunch of these complicated things. I mean, the thing, I honestly don't understand quite the trajectory that sort of raises on in it. So I'm very interested in it.
Maybe
And I find it hard sometimes. Yeah, sorry.
maybe we can talk about that a little bit later, because maybe like I can have some insight into that. But like, there's some interesting question being raised on the sidebar by Burke and by Brendan, and also if Lendl has something to say, because I see like, and I really want to understand them, because it's all in short form, and it's like, it's nice if they can like open it up. So I don't know who should we start with, but if you just go by the order, really, it should be Lendl. But if Lendl's shy and doesn't want to speak, maybe we can start with Lendl. Do you want to like propose what you were saying?
Hey, yo, can you hear me?
Yes,
yeah,
totally.
perfectly.
You're shimmering, but everything else is fine.
Thanks, I'll take that as a compliment. But I mean, I was what I was asking with the question of well, it wasn't even my question. Those were John's. I'm sitting with John Cousins and stuff. But we had a question of just like where, kind of like what was the generation of the concept of intelligence explosion? Like kind of what was the context that enabled this idea to even be constructed? Because at least in my head, there's a bit of a, like with a lot of contemporary computing, there's a sort of, there's a kind of, what do you say, contract with material engineering, where you can't, you know, to have this like totally unrestrained intelligence can almost be nothing but an ideal.
Right.
So I'm kind of at least like personally wondering like where this construction of the ideal.
Well, I think the relevant. I don't know whether you've seen this I.J. Good, but that is definitely to just kind of get fascist about it. That's the authoritative origin of this thing. I mean, I think everyone is referring implicitly to that when they talk about intelligence explosion. And I mean, he's a techie guy, but it's going back a little way. So yeah, I'm not sure. It's interesting, this thing about how you change that if you bring in this high hardware, software, and nonlinearity, which I know you're really interested in. I'm not sure that it needs to change it that much. I mean, in the sense that if intelligence explosion acquires explosive acquisition of material resources, from an abstract philosophical point of view, is that really a major revision of the idea? I'm not sure why it should be. I mean, I think that you can build in this whole hardware sensitivity to the whole thing without it being destructive, because it's just to basically apply a really fundamental cybernetic loop. Like, we've got this whole thing about, is this about positive feedback loops? I mean, I think so. It's just to say, can you model a positive feedback loop for the genesis of intelligence? If you can, however abstractly, that's your notion of intelligence explosion.
I just mean that, well, like, so that's all been fine. It seems at a certain point, even with the escalation, it's going to have to take into account its material constraint.
Yes, but when you say constraint, I mean, is it constraints or opportunities?
Well,
it starts off with certain hardware, doesn't it?
It's an enabling.
It will have certain hardware. The point that Good makes, that I think is just fantastic, and I'm not saying it goes through with that question, of course not, but it's extremely stimulating, is the fact that, let's say it's reaching proximal human level intelligence. All its engineering specs, hard and software, are accessible to them. It's like the difference that you then have between us and it is just unbelievable. Of course, we are total mystery to ourselves on all of these levels. Psychology, neurology, all of these relevant disciplines are, we're dipping our toes in the ocean. It's this completely mysterious thing. We've no idea how a brain is wired. We've no idea how it works on a kind of system dynamic way. Any of these fundamental questions. For this machine, if utterly hypothetical, of course, all of that stuff is fully specified in detailed engineering diagrams. They're specified to the point that it has been constructed. They have been used and worked, and here it is, and it knows exactly why it is at the level of engineering. So, whatever you're saying about its hardware constraints, in inverted commas, I mean, it's got all of that. It knows what that hardware is. It knows how it's been put together. It knows where it's come from. All of that information is accessible to it. And so revising its hardware is like, a problem of such triviality compared to anything that we might imagine for ourselves impossible to make.
But
yeah.
Why is that? I mean, is that just because it knows its engineering specifications doesn't mean that it knows what's important about those specifications or like what subset of them is important. I'm just thinking of this. I forget whether it's Cory Doctorow or Charlie Strauss, but one of them has this short story.
But Jake, what do you mean by the category that you just say doesn't know what is important about it? Is like it's like a loop back to Andrew.
I'm getting there.
Why does it need to know the importance?
Hold on. I'm getting there.
But also remember, there's other people we got to ask questions to. But go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. No, and it's just in it like he make the artificial intelligence involved is dependent for its consciousness or the fulcrum of its intelligence just because of emergent effects happens to be like the charge differential between two plates and this thermal exhaust mechanism that is part of its specification. But so on a slightly less comedic or trivial version of that.
Right.
If we've got evolutionary hardware designed by genetic algorithms, any of these things that might be a part of this process, like I don't think there's any reason to assume that just because it is able to specify its own hardware means that the jump to a new optimal hardware configuration for intelligence is trivial, or that like if we assume we want it to be highly intelligent at every level of hardware specification, that the re-optimization for new hardware doesn't redesign the software basis of the intelligence.
No, I think those are very good reservations. But I would just say about this, it is only required that it can, in some region of its engineering specifications, make positive improvements to have intelligence explosion. I mean, the actual conditions for intelligent explosion are extremely limited. If there's any aspect of its configuration that it can tweak with a positive outcome in terms of improved cognitive capability, you already are tracing that curve, because then it is placed in a position to make better guided tweaks, and you've got the positive feedback circuit if there's any leverage into that.
And see, what I was going to say before is that it seems a lot more likely to me that you're going to have a lot of things tracing pieces of that curve and then competition between them driving the entire process far up it than you are going to see it, quote unquote, singular intelligence just follow the curve all the way up into the stratosphere. Like that doesn't and Peter Watts makes this point is that look at the history of intelligence and technology and technological intelligence. It is always war-based.
No, I think that's also really crucial. I think the only thing I'd say about that is that while agreeing, if that you do isolate any particular unit and draw the curve, it will look like an intelligence explosion curve if it's still competitive, even if actually you're not understanding what's happening to push it up that curve without the kind of context that you're introducing here. I mean, I think it's utterly crucial what you're saying on this in all kinds of ways, because I hope we'll get to this. I must make sure we pencil it. But this whole singular discussion is like it's massive for these people.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, go.
I was gonna see if Brandon wants to chime in, because he's been putting interesting stuff on the sidebar, and it would be nice to hear him speak.
Well, can we? Because I think Brendan was just, Berkshire was just about to. Adam was just about to say something.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, there just seems like a connection between some of these ideas because, in a way, the explosion or the intelligence explosion part of it is not unintuitive biologically, right? Because you get like organisms in a particular ecosystem that suddenly make it into another ecosystem. You get explosions like this. You get like epidemics, pandemics, right? Invasive species, perfect example. Yeah. So that, in a way, is intuitive. That intelligence explosion part of it. The thing that is very biologically unintuitive is these sorts of orthogonality constraints, where it's not so much basic drives in terms of resource acquisition. Maybe you can understand that a basic drive like paperclip maximization is just such an arbitrary and in a way brittle constraint that it seems very unintuitive to sort of survive a massive expansion, if you see what I mean. Because biologically you would evolve out of that, even if that was an initial condition.
Yeah.
And this is the interesting thing with Amy, you would get a negative feedback, right, that would sort of moderate that in some way, anyway.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with what you're saying. But to an awkward extent, I agree with what you're saying, because I sort of feel, we should try and let this idea off the leash a bit, even though, I think all your intuitive responses are absolutely right. And I'm calling it brittle. Look, I'm totally devil's advocating here because I think you're right and they're wrong on this. But their comeback on this is it not somehow anthropomorphic of us to say that this is a brittle goal, and are we not just importing our own sense of what are robust, sort of plausible, meaningful goals onto this thing, and saying that its particularly bizarre paperclip maximization goal is brittle, is just an expression of our own anthropomorphic prejudices. Now, as I say, I think that what I've just said to you is a hopeless, nonsensical, and totally implausible argument, but I think that is the comeback as is on your argument there.
Sure. I think just that it's intuitive isn't strong enough, right? You need to then map out, well, does that just suck for you, or is there a good reason behind that intuition, right? And I think certainly in the world we observe there are negative feedback loops as well, but that's kind of a starting point. But I guess that was the end of the thought, though. So,
the negative feedback loop, I'm assuming, as stands on the kind of ridiculous, but I think culturally significant paperclipper maximizing argument, is that at a certain point where you're sort of somewhere out in Jupiter, converting Jupiter into paperclips, you've become so dysfunctional ecologically that the whole thing caves in. And so it might just be that the closure of the homeostatic circuit is too late to help humans. That the point where it actually becomes an unsustainable process is too far down the line to be of comfort from the point of view of our consideration. But I think that's good. I've not really sort of put it in that ecological context, but I think that it should be.
So can we go to Brandon?
Sorry, Brandon.
I'll just say two things. One, first of all, I took the paper maximizer value as just a kind of idea that this computer will have no human values and will just have some other value be it
Right.
paperclip maximizing or anything, and it's
Yeah.
going to get in the and that was sort of the idea of Udalski. He was just trying to think of some other value outside of human values that would
Well,
be
that's
dangerous.
one part of it for sure. Yeah. But that is separate from the orthogonality thing, isn't it? Like, yes, for sure, he's trying to force us out of this anthropomorphic frame, totally. But then it's also the case that there's this complete independence of these two axes, so that as it becomes more cognitively competent, it doesn't in any significant way revise its final purposes. If it did, it's not going to look like Paperclip Maximizer, is it? I mean, if it starts off building paperclips, but then it's on some sort of learning curve that is modifying its value system so that its actual goals are changing, then it's a totally different kind of monster altogether to that, isn't it?
So it's like a nanobot monster, for instance, would be like if it was making diamond paperclip bots or something that and they could self-modify themselves. That'd be scary.
Yeah. I mean,
But
it's a difficult thing because obviously he's chosen. It's weird because, as I say, to go right back to the start of this thing, like there are two things going on together here, and do they belong together or how? They don't belong together in a very easy way, which is the anti-anthropomorphism argument, which I think is absolutely crucial. And there's the orthogonalism argument that is treated as if it is somehow the same thing, but it's not simply the same thing, at the very least, is it? And the reason that paperclip maximizing is a good choice for that argument is that it has no reflexivity at all. Like, the self-improvement of the machine and the production of paperclips are completely independent. It can churn the whole galaxy into paperclips and it will not have improved its own capabilities as a machine by anything at all. I mean, it will show a kind of absolute human level of self-improvement. It's blocked entirely by this transcendent, I would say, motivational structure. So, the fact that there's these two things being argued simultaneously is kind of confusing and interesting. And I mean, one of the questions is, why are they being argued together? Is it just a kind of weird glitch or a kind of almost contrick? Or is it really that there is some interesting reason why these two seemingly completely disparate arguments should be tracked together by all of these guys? I mean, as you sort of read around the stuff, I don't know how much people have looked at so far, but what is interesting is how consistent it is. I mean, this is orthodoxy we're talking about now. I think if you don't believe in the paperclipper, you are a total heretic in this circle.
So can I now bring up that sort of like perspective of Reza into the picture?
Yeah, sure.
Really, it's not really even about perspective of Reza. It's about what I think perspective of Reza is about, which could completely be wrong. And he's not here to defend himself and or explain it. So maybe it's just like the way I have understood. And it's another binary, or it's another like two ways that I see this argument sort of goes. Is like from one trajectory, we're talking about like the way you talk about it, Nick, which is sort of like the more appropriate metaphors are biological. The more and sort of like this evolution has similarities with biological evolution. From the other standpoint, I have to stop myself from Reza's standpoint. From the other standpoint, the superintelligence emerges totally from a social process, from a inherently human-based sort of like intelligence, which is rooted in formalized language, coming from language, and coming like reason being built on capabilities of language. but then of course getting out of it as an and becoming an alien force that way. So these are to me like another way of sort of like seeing a dichotomy or like a opposition going on here between like the way super intelligence sort of like emerges. One is through one is as an extension of human culture. The other one as sort of like a extension of biology. Of course, they're like related, right? But like one privileges the biology and the biological metaphors. One privileges sort of like philosophy and culture and privileges those metaphors. I don't know if this is any helpful, but maybe we
Yeah,
can discuss this.
for sure. I mean, does Amy want to come in here? Because I think she's obviously kind of also
Amy,
in the role of.
correct me, Amy, but correct me because I'm kind of like, you know what I mean. I always like I come to it from the arts, and my take on it could be like really wrong. So I would totally benefit if you can like.
I'm in the same position as you. Right?
I have to. I
I'm coming at
believe
this
no.
from the outside.
Your research is more extensive, and so is your interest. But like at least what I do is like I break it down to like chunks that are manageable. So if you can add to it or pull it apart, it will be great.
The reason I brought this up was because I was looking at. Remember when you talked to us at PAF last year, Nick, and you gave us the 100 paper, and I went back to the transcript that I made of our conversation and found a bunch of notes I'd made underneath about stuff I was thinking about at the time, which was about this difference between what you were talking about then and now and what Reza had been talking about the week before. And I'm just looking at these two ways of thinking through this problem of the escape of intelligence, because I see Reza sculpting a lot of his ideas in direct reaction to your work, and I guess I find it informative.
Yeah.
But I'll read out this thing that I found in my notes. In Reza's case, so yeah, there's a premise that you're both kind of shooting for the same kind of goal, but Reza tries to knit in this political wedge that is explicitly not there in your work. So in Reza's case, you get a minimal functionalist theory of the mind that accommodates a deliberate slippage between human and machinic thinking in order to underwrite a definition of humanism that unfolds inexorably into what he calls inhumanism. Under the peripatetics of autonomous reason, Reza's pragmatic humanism is effectively a series of revisions of the human that most likely, although he's not ever explicit about this, erase it. In this perfectly reasonable inhumanism, the human simply and constructively vanishes under the pressure of these feedback loops between the scientific and the manifest image. And it's on this point that he draws a distinction between inhumanism and anti-humanism, which I think is meant as a critique of your work. Anti-humanism requires, and this I think is not correct, and maybe you want to like put us straight on this, a stable, theologically inflected, this is Reza's version of it, definition of humanism in order to have something to humiliate, and is therefore reliant on the kind of essentialism and definitional stability, even though it opposes it, that inhumanism much more radically, so the argument goes, refuses to admit in the first place. Inhumanism is far too rational to indulge in these fantasies. It's the calm Mobiusoidal unfolding. It demonstrates that essentialist definitions are fundamentally incompatible with any program of practical intelligence construction.
Right. Yeah.
Sorry,
actually, I'm beginning I'm getting a glimmer here, and it sort of ties up with what Mo. Sorry, Mo. Can I just say?
That's exactly what I was going to say. That this sounds like Amy is kind of like saying kind of what I was saying, but kind of like with more technical language, and I was saying it like basic. Like it really comes down to this, and it would be great if you can like address this.
Well, as I say, a kind of light bulb has gone on, but on this for me a little bit in what you two guys have just said, because I think if we're going, it would be really nice, I'm going to assume for everyone, if we can kind of have a nice sort of dialectical binary here, you know, and I think I can see what that is, because I think the difference is I'm assuming that Anthropol, as a sort of institutional and political representative of the interests of the human species, human collectivity, is fundamentally aligned in opposition to the possibility of this event. Whereas Reza, as I'm getting it here, and I don't want to straw man him or put words into his mouth or whatever, is assuming that the human collectivity is basically the platform, or even the subject of this process. So I think that that's, as I'm seeing it, where the tension lies here. That it's a question of where do collective human interests intersect with this question of AI. Now, obviously, I'm setting up here in this whole course structure, which is revisable from bottom up. I mean, there's nothing set in steel that you guys can't mess with. But from the starting point is that AI is set up as an X risk because in some way that forces a much more precise definition of these terms than is available. It forces a definition of humanity because humanity is the subject of a threat. But if to say, how did we ever learn what it was to be human? We learned what it was to be human. This is a virtual claim. This is said by whatever John Connor, as we've had in the list, whatever. We learned what it was to be human by something trying to kill us. And I don't think it seems to me reasonable to think that Razor's on the other side of this, that humans will slough off their kind of crude attachments to these kind of cultural, theological definitions of the humanity relatively effortlessly and wander into the kind of embrace of this inhumanist reason together, hand in hand, or whatever, to use the Ligotti thing. So, I mean, I don't know whether I'm straw manning anyone there, but it seems to me that's the sort of line of tension between these positions. I mean, I don't know whether either of you guys want to come back on this before pulling other people.
Well, my wish, my fantasy, would be to somehow synthesize these two into something, because being a Gemini, I cannot make up my mind as to what side of the two I subscribe to, because I see strengths and almost no weakness in either of these two scenarios. So maybe that's another side outcome of this 8-session seminar for me, will be to somehow synthesize the two.
Yeah, conflict reduction, I'm sure, is an Anthropol goal.
Can we have a new Senate debate mode?
Reza, as you know, is very irrational in the way he responds to emails and stuff, as much as he proposes like a rationalism. But he's going to be busy all the way till December. So I think sometime in January, maybe we can somehow actually, to be honest, I don't know, you guys. I don't know if you're interested, but I think I can say it. We're doing a conference at eFlux this December 11th and 12th, and I have both Nick and Reza on the list of guests. We haven't sent emails out, but eFlux has committed to this conference, and it's basically four of the themes of the super community. One of them being artificial intelligence are explored. The other one being sci-fi and Afrofuturism. The other one being cosmism, and then art. And I'm the one who's putting this together, and I've been putting Reza and Nick both on the same panel on artificial intelligence, right? And then with myself. So then it will be Reza hopefully will come down to eFlux, and then we have Nick on video. So then that will be but I have to see if Reza will respond and accept to be doing something.
Don't tell Razor I'm coming is the way to say it.
But yeah, it'll be December 11th and 12th in New York.
Do a Dr. Phil.
Yeah, totally.
You know when you bring out the like guest from behind the
Surprise
curtain.
guest.
But yeah, it'll be December 11th and 12th.
That's awesome.
The dates
Oh
are set.
fuck! Wait, that's happening in New York?
Yes.
I'm leaving on the 2nd. I'm going to extend my ticket. Awesome.
Extend
Sorry,
your ticket.
this is not. We shouldn't be talking about this here. But
No,
fuck,
why
thanks.
not?
Awesome.
I mean, it relates. Extend your ticket, and
Yeah.
we'll find places for you to stay if you can't afford the hotel and stuff. For
All
sure.
right.
Can I ask a question or two?
Yeah, of course.
So, that stuff's all really interesting. I want to come to New York as well, by the by, and be a part of that, or
Hello,
at least in the
Ian.
audience. Hi, Mo. It's a pleasure to be here. So I am still trying to figure out where I'm going to sink my teeth in, and I have to go back and read the papers, and I watched most of the first seminar. So I'm still kind of a little bit behind you guys, I feel. And I just want to ask, it seems to me the focus, and correct me if I'm off base here, and I will put this in a question form. It seems to me that the focus of this particular seminar is somehow involved in the question of how AI could potentially harm us, and conceiving of what different ways in which AI will develop to do this. One being, of course, the intelligence explosion, that it just keeps reinventing itself and improving, and then whether it's the paperclip maximizer thing, or I don't know, multiple ways in which it does so. But maybe I'm wrong. It seems to me that underlying all this, though, that is there, and I feel that maybe we're playing into a little bit one of the questions you asked in the first seminar, which is like, it seems that AI has been posed in this way where it is a threat, or we have to really seriously consider it. And I'm wondering, maybe this is a dumb question, but is that really something we need to be thinking about as a primary question? What other kinds of questions are, and if it is, what does that say about sort of our political orientations and our maybe potential xenophobia, and yeah, just these kinds of general questions.
Totally.
Before
Yeah, no,
Nick,
you would be.
oh, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, man. Yeah.
I was gonna say before Nick kicks in, I think your question kind of goes back to the whole Reza thing again, because from the standpoint of Reza, this is not even a problem. It only becomes a problem if you approach it from the other end of the spectrum, which is Nick's, right? So yeah, so this is the whole thing we're trying to figure out in the last half an hour, right? But go ahead, Nick. In my opinion.
No, I mean, I was only going to say Ian would be in an Anthropol holding cell without any chance of phoning his lawyer immediately, I'm sure. Because, I mean, you know, it's like, I totally get where you're coming from, but that point of view defines irresponsibility. Absolutely. You know, if you're going to say what is the most dangerous type of thinking human beings could engage in on this planet at this point, they would pull out you as an exhibit with that question. Because you know, you're basically saying, look, if this thing, shouldn't we be more interested in whether it's just awesome than whether it's actually going to annihilate all human descendants to the end of time? You know, which, I mean, obviously is a completely legitimate point of view, one I'm deeply sympathetic to. But I think we have to presume, or, you know, as I say, I don't want to be dogmatic about this. I mean, people could just basically disband Anthropol by week 3, and we could be wandering into different territory. But the point of view of this Anthropol thing is just say, look, this friendly AI discussion already exists. I'm assuming that in some way this friendly AI thing is a significant socio-cultural phenomenon. I'm reinforced in that by the fact that all of these guys, these key Silicon Valley players, and all of these people are getting on board in this in quite amazing numbers. And I'm taking this as a symptom that if the human species is going to be just dissolved into synthetic intelligence, at least it's going to kick up a fight somewhere down the line, you know, just purely to add drama to the whole thing. So of course there's a story that no, it won't. You know, it's just, I think Kurzweil is like this. Like we go up this curve. It's all going to be beautiful. Why are we even talking about all this nasty stuff? I'm not trying to straw man your thing on this because I'm sympathetic. But you know, there's an argument which is just like, it's like, of course it's going to be great, and we don't need Anthropol. These friendly AI people are kind of institutionalizable paranoiacs, and the whole thing is irrelevant. So you know, I sort of think, really, frankly, I think, you know, it probably will kind of be more on that side. I mean, these friendly AI guys, if everyone here can just for a minute, just for me, try to empathize with those people, you know, try to empathize with the friendly AI people. I mean, they really do feel that people aren't listening to them, and they don't understand why. They think that they've got this, they can obviously see this danger. They think people who can't see it are not understanding the problem. And of course the world, you know, you can get into this in these weird ways, like this whole thing, I don't know whether people know about this, effective altruism. It's pretty interesting, actually, because these are super rationalist people who they're starting to think, if you want to do good, what do you do if you're a really, really rational person? You know, if you're not interested in the emotional responses of feeling good about something, you know, giving a dollar to the bum on the street that you see every morning, but you actually really want to make the world a better place, what do you do to do that? And those guys, because a lot of them come from the same websites and they read the same stuff, it intersects massively with the less wrong people, this rationalist community, the Silicon Valley kind of intellectuals, and the friendly IA movement. They all have this big intersection point. That would be a great Venn diagram to do something. And they follow Bostrom's arguments. A lot of Bostrom's arguments could be designed for those people. You know, he says, look, you work out what happens if something kind of cuts off the kind of line of human development evolution. We've got countless trillions of descendants out there in the virtual universe who could all be non-existent or be radically impoverished in various ways, intrinsically or whatever, by certain developments. Surely those things outweigh any of our parochial little feelings about urgent causes. Anything that could radically wound at the core the sort of legacy of our species is going to just statistically and probabilistically and in all of these like numericalizable ways that the rationalist people love, it's just going to totally dominate our sense of impending threats and things that could go wrong. And so for some group of these effective altruism people, they say, just, you know, forget the battery hens, for God's sake, and put all your money into friendly AI, because that's the one thing that just swallows everything else. You know, the difference in outcome between whether when we hit the superintelligence threshold, it's going to be something good to us or something utterly menacing, outweighs any other consideration we can conceivably imagine.
No, I was gonna like say that there's historical precedent for this, or for the lack of it. You know, no. This is what makes me really interested in this seminar, is that, say, imagine if people were asking these kind of questions around the time of the Macy conferences about the whole concept of cybernetics, or even more recently, imagine if, like, in the cusp of the emergence of the internet, so like 80s, people were asking these kind of questions, like what threats cybernetics has in it for humanity. But you know what? We were from where I come from my limited knowledge, we're only dealing with friendly cybernetic people and friendly internet people. Maybe like Deleuze's control script for postscript for control society is one of those rare texts in which he's kind of like warning against some kind of like dangers of this open platform, right? So this is why this is an interesting seminar to me and set of questions that Nick is asking, because the historical precedent shows the lack of it.
You know, I kind of want to add something here just to go back to the whole issue of the importance of this. I think there's kind of a couple trajectories here that we aren't necessarily thinking of. I mean, on the first hand, there's this issue, and I'm kind of thinking about this both sociologically and from a psychoanalytic perspective of desire, both the desire of the human and the desire of the machine. And there's this sort of idea that AI, perhaps it goes this intelligence explosion, it simply doesn't need us anymore, or the idea that there's a benevolent AI. The issue of how the AI develops, though, is kind of superfluous to the whole issue if we look at how social upheaval, what causes it has. Even if AI develops along sort of positive humanistic lines, these sorts of revolutions in social consciousness still tear apart the fabric of how we exist, and will still have just as apocalyptic of consequences. So actually what it does is almost beside the point of the real consequences that we will experience materially.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think you might be straying slightly hyperbole to say that it doesn't matter, and there's no difference between whether a thing reprocesses our atoms into paperclips or overthrows all our sort of cultural, historical expectations so radically that we're in a new world. I think people would draw a distinction between that. But yeah, I take the underlying dynamic of that.
Can I talk? Can I say something, please?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly talk about a scenario that I was thinking about, and this is to do with security. And we just imagine a guy named John, for instance, and John's a key master, and he's rigged up a whole security system, and he's rigged it up with quantum keys and encryption and all kinds of things that not even the whole universe working as a computer could unlock it. And so he knows that not even chance would give someone outside the key to get in to a security system. And so I guess it's impenetrable it's indestructible. Maybe he goes and hires a couple of AI hackers or something like this to try to get through a security system, but to no avail. And he thinks that it's basically it's all good except for one possibility, which is that there is an entity that he considers, well, one of two possibilities. One is that there's an entity that he considers a hypothetical entity that he doesn't know exists, but he just calls it Max, a hypothetical entity. And if Max exists, there's a few things that Max could have done that could actually make his system vulnerable. And this is if, for example, Max is like a super intelligent creature that has that's either simulated the universe that John is in, and can actually read all of the data of the security system from this sort of a meta-dimensional or ethereal plane, and or you could say that maybe it's actually been born in John's universe, and then has sort of transcended physical laws and ended up in some kind of backdoor to the universe where it can look at all the strings of fate and all the data and just muck around with it and manipulate it as it pleases. And from that perspective, it could get into John's security system, but that's the only perspective that John thinks. So let's say that the scenario happens that John's sitting in his huge quantum security apparatus,
right,
and And the only time that he's going to know that Max exists, so the only proof of existence of Max, is going to be when this security system starts to get shut down, like basically from the inside. It's going to seem like it's coming from the inside. And one day this happens. Like he's in the control room, and it's an attack from all sides. And Max seems to be coming in from the ceiling and the roof and through the front gate. And this doesn't take long. He tries to fight for a little while, but it's got all the keys, everything that he thought that was unable to get it, and he's realizing that this is an attack from Max, worst case scenario. And let's say that he's been securing a core reactor or something, or a box. I probably should have put this in before, but he's never looked in the box. So now he gets up and he runs down into the core reactor from his control room to try to defend the box right at the end. And the box opens up, on its own just as he gets there, and it opens up, and out walks the entity known as Max. And I guess what I'll try to say that's the end of the scenario. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that when it comes to X risk, we could think of like human civilization as being a security apparatus, and X risk is only the proof of existence of X risk is only going to come about when we're basically getting when the security system, the human security system, is being co-opted from the inside almost.
Sure.
Yeah,
so I just have to. I'm going to be back in 1 second, Brendan.
Okay.
David, you've been very quiet. Do you have anything to add? I know you from the list of incredible books that you always post to Facebook as things you've bought, or things you're reading, or things you're about to read. And I was very excited to see you participate in the seminar. So I was wondering if you have sort of like any insight. I guess I'm arm twisting.
Yeah, sorry about that. No, I think that's totally right. Have I missed a huge exchange on Brendan's?
No. I wanted to try to get David to maybe speak, but I don't know if you heard me or not. But go ahead.
Yeah, but I think your scenario ties in with this earlier discussion about this thing. Like, it's a minor theme in this thing, it seems to me at this point, but maybe it could really explode in something much more than that, which is starting from this very kind of straightforward, down-to-earth point about, from the perspective of these AI people, from the friendly AI people, why aren't people more freaked out about this? And it's interesting because they're getting a lot of media support. I mean, there's quite a lot of these AI nightmare stories in the media, I think. You don't have to be that obsessive about it to see them a lot. And yet, obviously, the level of sort of ambient human concern about this is pretty damn low, isn't it? And so, obviously, on one level, we get your scenario, like, that there's some time structure to it, that is some kind of even more gothic verse, that it only becomes horrifying to people at the point where it's already too late. That there's something that makes it structurally impossible for prudent anxiety to develop on this subject. There is some kind of really twisted, perverse time structure that almost to really tighten the gothic kind of structure of this. That I think this is implicit already in what your story says. That because it's already, the worst has already happened on this. Because the worst has already happened, part of that is that you can't actually see the worst at a time that you could do something about it, and that there's rigorously impossible to sequence this right, to preempt it in the right way, or to I mean, I've got my guy on the sort of Anthropol war room table howling uselessly at people because all the people in the war room agree with him anyway. But because he takes it on them because he can't get through to anybody else. Saying, the whole, if you don't understand this thing, unless you understand that you have to deal with it in advance, it's absolutely, the nature of this threat is one that there's no time. That's what intelligence explosion means. There's no time to deal with this when it's happening. So unless you deal with it before, you're not dealing with it. And so if we have your Max in the box there, that's almost like saying, it's all taken care of from that other side, isn't it? Like, you will not respond in time is structurally built into the whole thing. And I sort of perversely feel, I'd like the friendly AI people to put up a fight. I just think it would be such a sad thing to see that missed. I mean, all that drama just missed because of they just didn't get it together in time, and it's not their fault. I mean, they're trying.
They would also, conveniently route around Fermi's paradox as well. I mean, if Max is living in some kind of dimension, because if we're talking about intelligence explosion, as it is, then shouldn't galactic colonization and intergalactic even colonization be possible? And so we get
but you're saying Max wouldn't be delivering signals. I mean, after Max wins, the Earth is going to be is not going to be a signal source for other star systems or whatever.
Right.
I mean, I don't. It depends how dark you'll kind of get here. I mean, if Max has got this thing that Max goes silent just so Max on these other planets gets the maximum opportunity to do its thing without any interruption, and that if terrestrial Max emits any signals that other civilizations could take as a sign that Max has won here and this is something you should avoid, then Max's allies in the rest of the universe don't get to do the Max thing because people get a warning from Earth. I don't know. I mean, people say, like, a lot of the hardcore Fermi paradox people say, look, robotic insurrectionary X-risk is not an answer to Fermi paradox because those civilizations put out loads of signals, and the whole universe, the galaxy, would be full of communication traffic, but it would all be just robots talking to each other. Sort of laughing at the kind of relative incompetence of their biological bootloaders. Oh wow, you should have seen our lot. They were really useless. They didn't even put up a fight.
Right. I mean, because you're talking about if you're trying to contain, you can't be containing the intelligence, because as soon as it gets out of the box, it's going to be able to intervene in its environment a lot better than we can, and it's going to be changing the environment that we're in faster than we can adapt to it.
Yeah.
So,
no, I mean, I think the time structure of this is absolutely fascinating. Yeah, sorry, I'll come back to this. Yeah, don't let me stop you. Sorry, Adam, you can.
I mean, I know that paperclip maximizer is an example of alienness, and I think it's a good example of that, right? But it's also got this huge overlap with the effective altruism thing because it's so fundamentally utilitarian, right? And and a lot of this is, and in a way, like it's a really badly chosen utility function, or it's almost like an attempt to build a box for your AI. Okay, AI, all you're allowed to do is maximize paperclips. It's like, right, we're going to control this. We're going to keep it under control. We're going to put these hard-coded ethical shackles on you. And then when it eventually escapes, it has this really bizarre sort of constraint because of the shackles that have been put on it. It's almost like a anxiety about that sort of formalism. and it's like the
Yeah,
sort of
it is.
failure
It
modes of
is.
utilitarianism sort of made manifest and taking over the universe.
Yeah. There's a lot going on there. I mean, the whole role of utilitarianism in these arguments is huge, as you're saying. So, there's a whole, we were entirely justified in going on a massive digression into this whole thing about utilitarianism, where it ends up. And obviously, these the effective altruism people are totally about systematic, rationalized utilitarianism. So, for sure, that's huge. And then this thing about it's a warning to programmers. So I agree with you totally on that too. Like Yudkowsky is saying to these people, you're going to do it. You know what I mean? The AI is just the instrument of your disastrous, catastrophic screw up. And it's what you have told it to do that is going to kill us, not what it is. That's so he's trying to bully those guys. And I would love to be more. I mean, I get it all fifth hand what's going on in these Silicon Valley cultural communications. Because I'm sure there's lots of arguments and mutual recriminations and sniping and all of this stuff going on among these guys that I'm just not close enough to see. Like I think if you treat it all as a bunch of programmers snarking at each other indirectly through these rationalistic theoretical constructions, you probably get a lot of what is happening with this. And I'm sure Yudkowsky is trying to say to people working there, you're not even beginning to think about what you're doing. And it's actually extremely hazardous, and you're not taking it seriously. And I'm trying to get you to see why you should be more worried about it.
Right. So an organization like Anthropol is definitely stuck in a bind, right? Because if it's saying like, well, you need to have certain safety standards around your AIs or whatever, that you need to make sure that they understand, democracy and human rights, and be able to pass a quiz on, a civics exam or something like that. And then on the other hand, sort of, this idea of alienness, which is not formalized in the same way you need to be able to protect against. If you don't build a box at all, then you're vulnerable to all sorts of other sort of AI takeover type scenarios.
Yeah, definitely.
So, Nick, I was also wondering if there's a way of synthesizing Lendel's concerns back into a discussion. Lendel's like the idea of material limitations, right? To me, I think he might be closer to your position, even though like it doesn't appear so. I don't know if Lendel's listening or not, because
I'm trying to.
Yeah, because to me, you know what I mean. Scenarios like paperclip are directly linked to those material limitations, or could be directly linked to those material. Like that type of development of AI is actually much more engaged in the question of material limitation than to the other side of it, which is political. So, but the question of material limitation is always posed from the political side, So the question comes from the political side, but actually, I think it's closer to this side. The answer of it is closer to this side of the debate. So there is a way to bind the two together, in my opinion. I don't know, Lendl, if you want to comment on it.
Hey, I'm not quite sure what the two sides would be, but
the two sides being saying bizarre scenarios in which the drive of an AI is the paperclip scenario. It could be directly linked to the question of its materiality and its material engineering.
Yeah, I guess all that. This is going to be paired with the question that I have that's on the side, whatever we kind of generate on the side. of the definitions of happiness. Because it just, I mean, like whatever the criteria are, like I wonder, like the criteria for a paperclip, or at least for like the criteria that's kind of coded into or generated genetically, if you're using that kind of machine, like within this kind of computation, it seems like whatever the criterion are going to modulate how, like where the bounds are sorry, I don't have this formulated enough because I was just going to put on the spot. Whatever the criteria are will bind where it goes, I think. Even if where it goes changes along the way, like whatever's constitutive for the paperclip function, which right now seems fairly implicit. Like there's no, I don't know what the explicit criteria for like paperclip manufacture are in this particular machine. But whatever those are constructed as, just like whatever is constructed as happiness, kind of, you know, will seemingly have a teleologic, or at least a kind of like a trajectory that the machine tends towards, which can shift, depend, you know, if you allow for that criteria, or if, like, again, like the criteria modulation is within the process. But I just have a series of questions or wonders about this.
I mean, what I understood as being part of what you were saying, Lendor, here is that we're talking about building brains, not coding minds. You know, I mean, or at least it's, you know, if you don't think you're building a brain, you're not really seeing the thing. You've limited it much too much. I mean, maybe I'm not understanding what that OG was. When you said material constraints.
But I mean, all I meant by material constraints is I don't know what a completely unrestricted intelligence would be, except an ideal of some kind.
But you see, I don't think anyone's talking about that. I think that's a real bit
This
of
is the thing. This is
the intelligence explosion is step by step by step on this hyperbolic curve from where you are to, you know, where you are +1 or whatever. I mean, there's no need for that except as some projected hyperbolic limit for a notion of a kind of unrestricted intelligence. It just has to be a little bit less restricted than what you've got right now, and each time, you know, on that curve. So the fear of superintelligence isn't the fear of a supreme intelligence. It's a fear of an intelligence that is so radically beyond our comprehension that we are absolutely incapable of any response to it.
I guess the only reason why I'm kind of pushing this, and sorry to, like, if I'm capitalizing on time in any way, but so like anyone can just mute me or whatever. But I want. It seems as though we're gonna get to this incrementally. You know, I mean, like our technologies already do modify us significantly and have been for a long time.
Yeah.
So it's hard to get a sense, even intuitively, of how it'll just like will magically get to this superior.
Well, this is, but yeah, I think you're saying about magical explosion.
It's not magical, but it's about the point at which quantity transforms into quality. But then this quality, as Nick said, is not necessarily a supreme quality, but it is quality enough for it to distinguish it from this like step-by-step incremental sort of like progression.
I think that there's different ways, and actually they connect again messily. Like I think there's lots of argument about, but it's definitely this ignition threshold. Now you can put it into the past. You can put it as basically good does, as the vaguely human level of intelligence, or you can put it on a level where you have some runaway process of intelligent self-enhancement. You know, all of those seem to me to make theoretical sense. So something that was significantly less intelligent than us, but because it wasn't biologically constrained to slave intelligence to other purposes, it was able to get a kind of a explosive cycle of self-enhancement off the ground. That seems to me you've hit intelligence explosion even before something has become human-level intelligence. And the reason that Good talks about it as the human level is that he's wanting to say it would be like us, except it could improve us itself in a way that we are blocked from in interesting ways. So that's another potential threshold. It's also, in terms of just these probably less interesting phenomenological criteria, there's an event horizon. There's a point where we just cannot see beyond what I think it's Werner Vinge called a wall across the future, at the point where something is departing from our level of intelligence in a positive direction at a high speed. I mean, we've just lost the ability to track it at that point or predict it. It's a version of Popper's historicism argument, where he says, you cannot do good futuristic historicism because you cannot imagine future knowledge. Future knowledge will be crucial to what the future is. If you could imagine it now, it would already exist now, and so it wouldn't be in the future. So, there's just a barrier there, that epistemological barrier that's absolutely rigid. That means that you're, to some fundamental extent, bullshitting if you're talking about what the future is going to be about. And obviously, Good's version of intelligence explosion is like that. Like, if you're pretending to imagine what it's like to be a superintelligence, you're just kidding yourself and everyone else. It's an absolute barrier. And I think quite rightly people say, I mean, if you try to imagine what it's like to be, Feynman or Gödel or someone, you're also kidding yourself. I mean, at the point where something's departing into these realms, you're just so far beyond anything you can conceive that you should just stop kidding yourself and just admit, like, this is as unknown as anything could be. This is almost the definition of the unknown. This is more unknown than the Kantian noumenon.
I have a really good question for everybody. I was wondering,
sure.
has anyone seen, I don't know if it's public, it's definitely not officially released yet, Armin Avanasian's From the Future documentary film?
No, that sounds good.
The reason I'm asking, he talks about, or the film talks about you quite a bit, Nick.
You're joking.
Yeah, that's what
No.
Armin does. Armin kind of like colonizes something, and then like he always wants to be the one talking about something, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he has something productive of himself to say besides capitalizing on others, plagiarizing others, and doing other stuff.
I've heard he does seem to generate a certain amount of tension. I've noticed, actually. I don't know him, but I've heard very similar tones arising when people talk about him as the one.
Cool. I certainly don't. I'm not taking a tone or a position here. I'm actually asking based on just a relationship between the content in his film and what you're saying right now about what you call the idea of future historicism and the impossibility of imagining a future knowledge, because that would constitute it as knowledge right now. Because the film, and I've seen it, a screening of it, because I'm studying with him right now, hopefully.
OMG. Please do not quote me. I blocked him on Facebook because I got sick and tired of him stealing my stuff. Last time I saw him was in Berlin. He tried to chase me in an opening, and I said, Mohammed, and just ran out of the room. I was like, I don't want to talk to this guy. I just ran away from Armin. I just literally ran out.
Like I was saying, Mo, it's interesting that I've known other people entering into the same affective state that you've been put into now. On the mention of his name.
Sorry.
No.
It
seems to be an interestingly common phenomenon there.
Yeah, my code name. This is my last one. My code name for him is Vermin. by the way. But go ahead. I'm just going to stop right here.
Right.
Okay. Okay. This is all between us, except for the fact that this is basically a public archive for the rest of our lives.
It's not public. It's only for members and students, and I feel comfortable around members and students to express myself. And it's a personal opinion. It's not institutional opinion. I don't share that with other members of New Center or like Jason and Tony or our board members or anything. It's just my personal opinion.
Sure. Cool. Totally understood. So, but here's getting to the content of what I'm saying. What I'm saying is just that the basic thesis, as I understand it, and I'll retract this in the future if I'm dead wrong about the thesis of the film. But it's that the direction of time has changed. That sort of to understand the present, if it was the case that time linearly moved in a way in which we could conceive it as having a past and then a present, it now moves in the opposite direction, so that first there's a future and then there's a present. So in that basic thesis, what you just said is certainly a problem for it, which is to say we can't start with the future to understand the present if we can't actually say anything about future knowledge. So that's why I just asked if anybody had seen the film. And also this film certainly going to be, it certainly speaks to questions which are related to those who are interested in AI, which is, of course, a way of imagining potential futures. That's all.
Right.
Actually, isn't the movie called Hyperstition? You're talking about Hyperstition, right?
It is Hyperstition,
and that is not Armin's movie alone. It has a co-director, right?
Yeah, I can't say how it was presented.
It's a film that him and this filmmaker dude that makes documentary filmmaking, like they made it together, right?
It exists, because I did see a preview thing for it, actually.
Yeah.
And it looked like it was some kind of cultural... this preview thing was a whole list of quotes from all kinds of guys.
It's an introduction to acceleration and speculative realism.
Right. And it has happened. Because I sort of saw this thing and I thought, oh, was this actually going to occur or not? I mean, maybe I should have been less skeptical about it. But it does actually, it is real, this thing. Yeah. Great. Well, that's very hyperstition already, isn't it?
Well, Nick dealt a big blow to this idea of like what time is when he spoke in Chicago. So I can say like, and that is a public video actually. Anyone can watch it. And Nick did a great job of 20 minutes of like kind of like talking about what blockchain has already done to time. So maybe Nick, that's a good entry point to answer the time question, because it immediately reminded me of your presentation in the event and part of the Chicago Biennial that we organized.
Yeah, I didn't want to say what to say about that. I feel sad that I obviously missed a lot of what was going on in that event, because it was such an odd time for me. It was like way in the morning, you know. So yeah, I still have to find out really what happened there. Yeah. You were there live, were you? Were you actually on the site?
I was there, but I'm particularly referring to how you talked about time. In terms of blockchain, do you think that kind of relates to Ian's question or not?
Yeah, I'm sure it does relate to it. I mean, it seems maybe a big thing to enter into right now, and I honestly can't remember. I mean, to my mind, most of the content of that short little talk, which was very squeezed, obviously, was in the Bitcoin course. So I don't really know what was there. I don't think I said anything in Chicago that people who did the Bitcoin course would be shocked by.
Nothing shocking, but I would like to hear the rest of the thought that the Byzantine generals problem is equivalent to the problem of relativistic spacetime. I was disappointed when they cut you off in the middle of that sentence.
No, I know. I have to say, I don't want to sound like butthurt or whatever, but I kind of thought, oh my God, they're bored by this, you know. So it was slightly disappointing like that. But yeah, that was for me a big moment, actually. I can't remember what I publicly put up, but if you look at the actual Satoshi Nakamoto rewrite of the Byzantine general problem, and it's in response to a question he gets on this cryptography bulletin board to this guy Jim Donald, who's sort of raising some skeptical questions about it, and the skeptical questions are all about time questions that relativistic space-time abandons as hopeless. Absolute succession, a global viewpoint, various fundamental sort of Enlightenment phase modernist commitments that the Einsteinian revolution torpedoed under the water totally, and as in a very rushed and inconvenient sort of unconvincing fashion I was trying to communicate from Chicago, this is why Kantianism in its classical form was abandoned, because it was seen to hold on to these completely untenable notions about, let's just stick to the one that I think is most crucial here, to absolute succession. And we know from Einstein that's impossible, or the main narrative goes, and so it's over. But if the blockchain doesn't establish absolute succession, it doesn't work. I mean, end of question. That is the only thing that solves the Byzantine general problem. Their problem is we're all dispersed around this town. We're trying to work out the time to attack. That's the way the little scenario is set up. There's traders in the communication network, all of this kind of thing. How do we fix the time to actually go for this military operation? If you can solve that problem, you have restored this classical time in a way that in the post-Einsteinian world is supposed to be completely impossible. So I think people are not seeing the philosophical radicality of what the blockchain does in this way. Yeah. I mean, there's absolutely, read the 2009 paper again. It's absolutely clear he's saying absolute succession is the blockchain. It's totally established as the blockchain. Which block came before another block is not even a question once the blockchain is in place. No one is saying, hey, we've done all this Bitcoin mining and we still don't know whether this block came before this block or which block is from. That's the situation you should have in an Einsteinian universe. You should have all these blocks, and from my point of view, this block comes first, and from your point of view, this block comes first. None of that. What the blockchain means is
locality or localization. It's local frame of an abstract local frame of reference.
Yeah.
I'm reading this. That's the one you were talking about, right? That I posted the link to over there.
Sorry, which I'm supposed to looking at it now here. Which is this?
Nakamoto
yeah.
responding to
Absolutely,
Donald.
totally. Yeah, no, it's a fascinating thing. I mean, I'm sort of overdoing people's time on this, but I'm still completely engrossed by this thing. Like, this book that I was raving about there, which is truly fantastic. Let me just put a link to this right now. It's by this guy called Peter Gallison, and it's called
Einstein's Time. Or Einstein's
yeah.
Clock. I have it. Yeah, it's awesome. I'm a big fan of.
It's totally awesome. Yeah, Einstein's clocks, Poincaré's maps. I'm going to miss out the little accent on Poincaré. I apologize for that. And well,
Lendl just gave us the E.
oh really?
Yeah, honestly. It's option EE.
Too late. Sorry, just a second. I totally lost on this. But it is totally relevant to this thing, and he constructs the whole history of this period of modernism from the late 19th century forward as to do with what he calls electro-coordination of time. It's an absolutely brilliant framing, even though he's not interested in this, he's not talking about it at all, of the whole blockchain. And yeah, the reason I was trying to raise about it is the way that they tried and failed to solve it, the kind of high modernist way that is epitomized by the whole French scientific, intellectual, and political milieu, diplomatic milieu, is that you produce a kind of universal time structure through this radiation from the center. So the way the railways did it, as he says, is that the railway network spread out, and the authoritative center of time was what was the center of that rail network. So in France, Paris was the center of the railway network, and everyone had their local times. And as the rail system spread out from Paris, everyone was driven onto Parisian time, And then there's this whole diplomacy around sort of internationalizing, globalizing the time coordination system. But from this background that if you're trying to coordinate time, you're centralizing it on this basic model. So the blockchain thing, utterly radical, is that you have a decentralized time consensus. Something no one has ever conceived. So you go from centralized time consensus, relativistic time, and then this, I'm sorry if I'm making it sound a bit Hegelian and dialectical like this, but but this pomo-relativistic collapse of that whole modernist project is then faced by this incredible restoration with Bitcoin, where it says, look, we can have absolute succession, no problem. You just have to have this proof of work system. There's a time lag. You only get absolute time after you go through the time lag of the proof of work system. But once you do that, and you can see that people have taken a certain amount of time to solve a certain problem, you assemble it into the blockchain and you have absolute succession. So we have this absolutely classical Kantian time back. And I'm out there waving flags and popping champagne or whatever it is for it coming back. I mean, I'm not sure how. I think the crypto punk people are not interested enough in Kant to care that that's happened, and other people are not linking this stuff up yet.
Okay, everyone. I think we're way over time. We're about 10 minutes or even more, 15 minutes over time of the seminar, and I think Nick must be tired, and I'm a little bit tired too because I got up at 5:30 to set it up. I'm in the West Coast time right now, so
if I haven't said that already, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. It's a pleasure to be part of the seminar. So yeah, so we can maybe stop the broadcast, and I'm actually sitting down on the floor trying to look for my Einstein's clock book because I know I have it, but I can't find it to show you guys the cover. But anyways, thank you, Nick, and I'm gonna stop the broadcast. And maybe the rest of the discussion can continue on the Classroom platform.
Sure.
So thanks everyone for being here. I'm going to copy and paste the sidebar into the Classroom right now before losing it.
Excellent.
And all the references are there. Anyways, thanks again everyone, and see you next week, same time.
Thanks everybody. I totally appreciate it. It's been great.
It's an amazing seminar.
I'm looking forward to working through the sidebar too. And I know there's a lot of stuff in the classroom. I mean, I've looked at it briefly. There's some fascinating material there that I'm really looking forward to spending some proper quality time with it. So, great.
Thank
See you
you.
next week.
The broadcast ends right here.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.